Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the Fronius webinar introducing the new Fronius GEN24. Just a few quick items before we get going today. During the webinar, all attendees will be muted for best audio quality. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to type in your questions. They will be monitored and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and shared with all of you within 1 week of today's session. And it is my pleasure to introduce our Fronius presenters, Harsha Kumar and John Austin. Harsha is the manager of tech support at Fronius and has been for the last 7 years. He has a background in power electronics, power systems, and renewable energy. John is the director of sales at Fronius Canada and has a background in commercial roofing and manufacturing sales. Without further ado, I will pass it over to John to get us started.
Thank you very much, Tatum, and to Charge Solar for having Fronius today, and most importantly, to the many dealers that have joined the call. I know it's an extremely busy time for you all, and we appreciate you attending this Gen24 webinar. We're excited at Fronius. We're really excited. I was talking to Charge Solar earlier, and it has been a number of years since we've launched new technology to the Canadian market. In fact, it's been 10 plus years. What you're about to see in the Gen24 is our latest technology. It has been sold in other markets, but not in the North American market. So it has a strong track record already established in Europe and in countries that we refer to as rest of world, Latin America, Middle East, etc. And now it's time to bring it to North America. So without further ado, we'll jump in. We're going to be introducing the Gen24 in person, going coast to coast, starting on the East Coast, and even though the trucks are going in the wrong direction, starting in the East Coast in August and heading out to BC in September, and the other dates that you see across the board there as well. For those that are from Ontario, we're going to be holding 2 separate events at our Mississauga facility to introduce the Gen24. So regardless of where you are across Canada, we'd invite you to attend one of our road shows. They're on our website as well, the details, where the venue is, the timing, that sort of thing. For some, if not all, Harsha will be joining me. So if you want to get much more technical into the product itself, Harsha will be at my side to address any questions you may have. So please check it out if you're able to do so. So before we get into the Gen24 and the attributes of the inverter, just want to touch on a few things that remain a constant at Fronius. We have a heavy focus on our 24 hours of sun campaign, and really it comes down to energy management as we transition away from fossil fuels. And the 24 hours of sun is how best can we address as much of the load in a home or a business 24 hours of the day. So the Gen24 that we are going to show you is a start on that path for us in North America, in that it is a hybrid ready inverter, again, that I'll expand on here in a little bit. And obviously being hybrid ready, when it's a full hybrid inverter, you have the option for battery storage and using that stored energy when the sun is not shining, to break it down to its most basic. We have a number of products that we sell in Europe. Obviously, we manufacture in Europe and sell in Europe and in other countries that we haven't yet launched here in North America. We're talking about the Gen24 today, but it's only the start of product introductions, quite honestly, for the North American market. And when you look at our product portfolio as Fronius and what we make and sell, there are certain products that absolutely make sense to bring in. We need a replacement for our existing SIMO, so we need a 3-phase inverter replacement, and we have it, and we just launched it in Europe. It's a product called the Verto. So there's that. We have our e-mobility solution in Europe that we're working on bringing to North America. That's for plugging in your EV cars. And we have other items as well, other products, right up into and including central inverters. So what you're going to see from Fronius over the next little while is the polar opposite of what you've seen over the last 10 years. Again, to repeat, the Gen24 is just the start of good noise coming from Fronius. It'll be a constant drip of new products coming. Our next product launch is already scheduled for November of this year. Into 2025, we have launch plans. Into 2026, we have launch plans. So this will be a continual good noise campaign coming out of Fronius. So what are customers looking for in an inverter? It is a simple and quick installation of that inverter, flexible and future-proof as well. Lean system design, maximum yield, and energy independence. That goes back to addressing as much of the load in your home as we possibly can. We'll get into the installation of the Gen24, but we think we've checked most, if not all, of the boxes on that list. There's a look at the unit itself. Again, brand new to Canada. I was just saying to Brian Douglas, of course, of Charge, that I'm thrilled to report that our very first containers have hit the Port of Montreal, and they are expected into our warehouse. That product is expected into our warehouse imminently. So it's a very first order, so we're pretty fired up to get it here. You're going to see a couple of things on the inverter itself that are different from a Primo. So again, this is a single phase inverter. We'll get into the power classes here shortly, but up to 10 kilowatt, simple switch, an active cooling system, which is a sales guy's way of saying a fan. And you'll see that we no longer have the display window that the Primos had, but we now go to a light system that you can just see that bar directly above the Fronius logo. So a very, very simple design, not a lot of parts on or in the inverter. And again, we'll get into more detail on that. Physically, the size of it, it is significantly smaller than the Primo as well. Anyway, so we'll continue to dive in. So as you know, the inverter, in our opinion anyways, is the heart of the PV system. And really, you know, it comes down to when you look at a Fronius product, we have a tremendous track record of reliability in both our Primos and Simos that most, if not everybody on this call, are familiar with. And really that carries over into the Gen24. And I say that because when I led off the presentation, I mentioned that we've been selling this in other markets. We've actually sold 500,000 Gen24s, over 500,000 units already. So we have absolute confidence in its performance. And when we deliver it to the Canadian market, we think that we're just going to continue on that reliability track that we've done and proven with the Primos of the past. So yeah, we'll carry on. So the power class that it's available in are 3, 8, 5, 6, 7.7, and 10 that you see there. So obviously we know that we are missing some of the higher power classes that we had with the Primos. Specifically, that's the 11.4, 12.5, and 15 kilowatt. It is not part of the Gen24 family today, but we are working very closely with our Austrian parent and our R&D department there. We certainly feel a strong need for those higher power classes, but I don't want to overpromise and assure you that it's coming when I don't have confirmation that they're coming. But we're working hard to replace those higher power classes with the Gen24. And just to back up for a second, just so you all know, the Primos and Simos, while they're not UL 1741 SB certified, will continue to be available from Fronius. We will continue to produce those inverters in Austria, and as of right now, the plan is that we'll continue to produce the Primos and Simos through all of 2025. But again, for those on the call from a heavy UL 1741 SB market, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Atlantic Canada, small parts of BC, obviously they don't work for you, where the Gen24 is UL 1741 SB compliant and will work in those markets. So Primos and Simos still available as we transition through to the Gen24. And again, the Simos, the intention is to be replaced by the Verto when the time is right to do so. A couple of the other specs that you see on the slide there are the two MPP trackers. We understand that our competition, or some of our competition, have more MPP trackers. We get the need for it. We're not there with the Gen24, but as again, new products are continue to be launched into North America, I think you'll see an improvement on that front as well. So some product strengths. This is delving into Harsh's territory a little more, but we've got a great suite of digital products that help you all out in the field. The screen grab that you're looking at there in the bottom right-hand side is our solar web product. Harsha can certainly expand on that, but again, for the dealers on this call, please encourage your customers to register their inverters, whether that's the Gen24 or any other Fronius product. Why register? Well, for a number of reasons, but you know, it allows them access to the solar web, which is at no charge. Solar web is a tremendous tool for them to see their production, where that production's going, how much and when. But beyond that, you know, really, if there's an issue with an inverter in the field, and they have registered their product and they have solar web, it allows Harsha and his team to go into that specific inverter, look back in the history, get a track record of what the faults were, when they were happening, et cetera. So it's just a tremendous tool. Anyway, and if they register their inverters beyond solar web, beyond the benefits of that, we're also offering an additional 2 years of warranty. So right now, you get 10 years of warranty with a Fronius inverter. We have the 10+2 program. So if they register their inverter, they get an additional 2 years of warranty at no additional cost. And that promo, if you will, is running through the end of the year. Easy installation. Harsha, did you want to jump in on the installation piece here for a little bit? Because I know that you've opened and closed a heck of a lot more than I have. So if so, feel free, Harsha.
Sure. Thanks, John. So for you know, the folks on the call who have installed Primos and Simos, you know that to install a Primo or a Simo, you need Torx. It's basically a Torx screwdriver. Now, we did see some concern, especially because despite strong, you know, labeling and notifications saying do not use power tools on any Fronius products, people did end up using them. So what we did was to install the Gen24, you don't really need a screwdriver because we've done away with screws. So the screws that you need to take off or you know, to put back in for the purposes of installation, they are what we call twist nuts. So it's just a one half turn, 180 degree. So if you turn it clockwise 180 degrees, you close the twist nut. You take it the opposite direction, a half turn 180 degrees, you basically undone it. And even for the wire terminals, the concept in terms of, you know, not having to redo and undo wiring should you need to exchange an inverter for whatever reason, has been carried through. Except here, you don't even need the screws to basically terminate your wires even. So you can see in the picture on the top left and on the top right, we've got those connectors. So those connectors basically have catch releases. So if you were to raise that orange tab, your wire is free. you would raise the tab, insert the wire, and let the tab loose. It holds on to the wire. So there is no screw terminations there. And if you wiggle the entire block, the block comes loose from that place, from the holder, that is. So that way, were you to be in a situation where you need to exchange the inverter for whatever reason, you could basically just wiggle those blocks, they'll come loose, and then you can just lift the inverter up without having to either re-terminate your wires or having to take the wires off, which would have been the case were it to be a different make, or if you were to go back with the primos and the simos, you still don't need to take the wires off. That's because they stay back on the terminal block, except here we don't even have the idea of the terminal block anymore. Now, the orange clamp, the clips or whatever I was referring to earlier is basically the spring clamps that's mentioned down here. And in terms of hooking up the inverter, your wires end on those clamps, and then you basically hang the inverter up on the mounting bracket. There are no wires that go on the mounting bracket, like you would see on either the prime or the side.
Thank you, Harsha.
Thanks, John.
So again, back to our digital suite of products. We've got the Solar Creator. I believe Harsha is working on dropping links into the presentation here so that you will be able to check out each of these. And there's a brief description beside each one. From Solar Creator to Solar Start, which is our commissioning tool, Solar Web for monitoring, as I mentioned, the Solar SOS for all the dealers on the call. That's another tool that we really encourage you to become familiar with and use as much as possible. For those of you that haven't used it, basically it is a digital tool that you're out on site and you're trying to troubleshoot an issue with a Fronius inverter. By using Solar SOS, through a series of drop-down menus, it will allow you to zero in on the issue most probably. If it gets to the point that Solar SOS doesn't lead to resolution of the issue, what it does is it'll take you right through to the point of creating a ticket that then goes to our technical team. But all of that work and time that you put into trying to figure out the issue by using SOS, that is retained, and our technical team is not starting the conversation with you from ground zero. They've got all of your input already. So again, when you're looking to expedite resolution of an issue on a Fronius inverter, strongly encourage you to familiarize yourself with SOS and put it to practice. That said, if a number of charge dealers would like a SOS presentation, or any of these digital tools for that matter, please reach out to Charge or directly to Fronius, and we can certainly set that up for you. The very last one that we have on there is our repowering tool. Again, another great digital tool, but and we have a pretty strong repowering campaign ongoing across Canada right now. But beyond the repowering tool, if you have a repowering project upcoming, and if that's replacing a Fronius inverter with a new Fronius inverter, great. Or if it's replacing somebody else's inverter with a Fronius inverter, either way, please reach out to Harsha or reach out to our technical team before jumping into a repowering project or retrofit project. There's a lot more than just unplugging one inverter and plugging in a new inverter, as I'm sure most on the call know. It's about the system integrity. We don't want ground faults. We don't want anything to impact the new inverter that you're putting in there, at least unnecessarily. So please work with our technical team on that. Just a little additional insurance as you work on retrofitting or repowering projects. Quick commissioning. So again, this is the Solar Start app. It allows you to commission that brand new Fronius inverter that you just installed in 3 steps, as the slide says. And again, just over a few minutes, that Fronius inverter will be up and running for you. Solar Web, already talked about that a little bit at length. Again, the graphic that you're looking at there is showing you what you're collecting, where it's going to service load in the home or back to the grid in the bottom left of that one image, or in the case of a hybrid, to your battery storage. Minimum service turnaround, I don't want to steal too much of Harsh's thunder here, but there's, I said earlier in the presentation, there is just not a lot to repair on this inverter. In fact, there is one printed circuit board, one only. There is an active cooling system, fan. There is the main switch. There's the communication piece, the pilot that we refer to here. And outside of that, there is not a lot. So from a service standpoint, I believe what we're going to be looking at, if there's a situation with these inverters, it's probably more often than not, if you have an issue with one of them, a replacement more so than it would be servicing it. I think that's a fair assumption. And at the last point there, again, just driving home, please dive into SOS as much as you possibly can on your troubleshooting for the Gen24 or any Fronius inverter. So again, when we looked at the list of what we're looking for or what a dealer is looking for in an ideal inverter, one is, ensuring that it is future proof. So the Gen24 is hybrid ready. Now, what that means is it's got all the same hardware in there as a Fronius hybrid inverter. I'm going to get to that in a little in a second, but it doesn't have the software. So in November of this year, we will be launching what we're calling the Gen24 Plus. The Gen24 Plus is an out-of-the-box hybrid inverter. The Gen24 that we're launching right now is hybrid ready. So for your customers that are considering battery storage at some point in the future, whatever that might be, a year, 2 years out, maybe they never get there, but they would like the ability to offer a hybrid, they would like the ability to go to battery storage if they so choose. The Gen24 is an ideal inverter for them. So they buy it today, they buy it at less of a price point than a full hybrid inverter out of the box, right? The Gen24 Plus that's coming in November is for those consumers that are wanting to get into battery storage right away. So again, Gen24, Gen24 Plus, exact same hardware. The customers that want to make the Gen24 a hybrid will purchase the software in the future. Once downloaded, it then becomes in effect a Gen24 Plus. Yeah, and I think that pretty much covers the extent of what we're shooting for there. So it is upgradable, and the plan is that Charge would inventory both, but have two distinct price points to sell to cater to the customer's needs of today and possibly in the future. So how would they do that? Great looking slide that I've got on the screen, our up storage. The up storage has not been released in Canada as yet. The up storage is basically our web shop, but that's not going to hold us up. So it would be the most seamless for the consumer to get that software download. But at the end of the day, like we sell warranty extensions, we do that through our customer service team. It's handled very quickly. The money's collected and then rolled out. Same thing with the Gen24 upgrade. That will be addressed as of today through our customer service team. But at the end of the day, it's about delivering that software package for those that want to upgrade that inverter to a hybrid, and we have the means to do so, regardless of us not having web shop today. And I'm sure everybody on the call is already tired of hearing this sales guy babble and babble. So I will hand it over to Harsha. He's going to go into our dynamic peak manager algorithm and explain that a little deeper against microinverters and optimizers that we're oftentimes up against. So Harsha, the floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, John. So with regard to shade management, so this is kind of misunderstood by a lot of people because different manufacturers pitch this in different ways. So they talk about advanced algorithms and other things and extra electronics and things like that. But at the end of the day, what shade basically does is it reduces the amount of power the PV array can potentially offer to the inverter. Okay, and how much does it reduce that? The available power by is a function of what kind of shading you've got, and what exactly is this shade. In a sense, when we speak about shade, the most common understanding for shade is basically there's no light, but it's not as cut and dry, because if you were to look at the shadow that's cast by an object, you'll see that there are parts of the shadow which are completely dark, which is usually a very small portion, and then you got a much bigger area which is kind of like gray. In the sense, it's not completely light, because if it were light you wouldn't see the reduction of the darkness, but at the same time it isn't actually as dark as the little portion that I told you about. Now, how big that little portion is compared to the other portion. So I use generic terms for that sort of shade. It's called, I like to call it hard shade, where it completely blacks things out. And the softer portion is what I refer to as soft shade. But the actual terms for those would be umbra and penumbra. And so how far whatever is casting the shadow is from the surface onto which you're getting the shadows, in which case for us it would be the PV panels or the PV modules, decides how much of a loss in terms of the available power you would get to see from there. Now, there's different ways about this game. So for example, take this example where you see, so you've got that little portion of the roof that juts out. So that is casting a shade to the other side. So assume now that the sun's rising in the east. And so because you haven't exactly hit noon yet, the sun isn't directly overhead. And so while it is in the east, the shadow cast by said object is going to be on the western side of the object. And as the sun hits noon, you'll almost see no shadow. And once you go past noon, the shadow moves to the east side because now the sun is in the west. So you basically have a sort of moving shadow. But here, the shadow is being cast by a solid object, which is a part of that structure. But similarly, you could also have shadows being cast by vegetation, moving clouds. You've got like a moving plane, whatever. There's different ways you can have shadows, and different impacts of said shadows. Now, oftentimes it is misunderstood that because you've got a portion of a panel on one string that's shaded, some manufacturers will try to hype that by saying you've lost the entire production of that string. Okay, that the hype is usually from somebody who's trying to sell you either a microinverter or an optimizer, which again isn't entirely true, simply because the most PV panels, not most, pretty much every PV panel that's available on the market does come with a bypass diode, which does mitigate a whole bunch of that shading or the loss of production. But also you have to remember that nobody ever puts a 10 kilowatt array on a 10 kilowatt inverter, because we are not exactly in the tropics, so which means that the sun is going to be lower and higher in the horizon depending on what season you are at. And also over the course of the day, because the sun's moving across the sky too. Rises in the east, moves across the sky, and then sets in the west. If it were to be peak summer, the sun is way high up there. And if it were to be the midst of winter, then the sun would be really low depending on how far north you are. Now, during all of those situations, what you're trying to do is to get as much power out of the array as possible, which is why we tend to oversize. And one recommendation we'd like to give you all the time is, assuming, of course, you've got enough roof space, maximize the PV array, the ratio of the PV array to the inverter capacity by the maximum permitted by the manufacturer. In our case, it is 150%. What that means is, without voiding the warranty and assuming you've strung the PV array the right way so as to not damage the inverter, you can go 1.5 times what the inverter's rated AC output is. So if I've got a 10K inverter, I can put 15K's worth of panels on that 10K inverter, despite knowing that if you did truly have 15K worth of light, or rather light enough to produce 15K worth of power from the array, the inverter is still going to throttle that to 10Ks anyway, simply because the inverter is rated to give you only 10K. So then you might come back to me and ask me, okay, then why exactly am I oversizing? You oversize because you know that the sun isn't always going to shine as brightly, and you won't be as shadow free, that you will always be in a situation to get 15K all through the year. So when the sun is much lower in the horizon, or you're in a gloomy season of winter, or your neighboring tree just leafed out completely and shaded a portion of the array, your oversizing is one way to minimize the impact of that, all of these conditions of low light, cloudy conditions, or shading, so that even with a 15K array, you still potentially can get 10K worth of power from that inverter. That's one way to do it. And you also want to keep in mind that this is happening without any additional electronics. And the single most, reliable component of any PV system is the PV panel, or the PV module, to be precise. That's the reason why they give you 20 or 30 year warranties on them out of the box. So it's always going to be a much simpler fix to simply oversize the array than to throw on more and more fancy electronics on the system, because your electronics will fail before the PV array fails. And also troubleshooting electronics is a lot more, what should I say, problematic if you've got electronics behind every PV panel on the roof, because merely getting access to one panel right in the middle of the array and then taking that apart to reach the electronics behind it is going to be a lot of legwork and also time and money. So now, instead of doing that, you might as well attack the problem by just oversizing the array to the maximum possible without voiding the warranty on the inverter. The second thing is, all inverters, including ours, have what we call maximum power point tracking algorithms. Okay, ours is called Dynamic Peak Manager. And so here in this particular plot, you can see there are three curves. Okay, the one in blue is the PV array with absolutely no shading on it. The other two curves, the ones in red and the one in the other one in black, are when the same PV array has a little bit of shading on it. So GMPP is short for Global Maximum Power Point, and LMPP is called Local Maximum Power Point. Depending on how you've got shading on the PV array, you can have multiple local maximum power points, not necessarily just two like the ones we see here. The inverter's algorithm is basically running through this PV array, finding out all of your local maximum power points, comparing which one of them provides you the most power, and it's going to position or operate the inverter such that the inverter is going to get you the global maximum power point worth of power from the PV array under that condition. Another thing you want to keep in mind is these conditions are not static, they're changing. Your clouds are moving across the sky. The wind is going to rustle the leaves, of the tree that's casting shadows, which means those shadows are going to be moving. And also the sun too is moving across the horizon and the sky. So now as that moves, you might, if you weren't tracking the maximum power point, you might be sitting on a less than optimal power point from 5 minutes ago, which is why this algorithm is repeating in real time, all the time at periodic intervals. Okay, so different manufacturers have different periodicities. So ours has something like 5 or 10 minutes. I can't exactly tell you that because it's proprietary, but you can take 5 minutes as an example. So after 5 minutes, the inverter will sweep the array again because it might be a different sort of curve now, simply because the sun's moved, or maybe the clouds were blown away by the breeze and things like that. So every 5 minutes, as an example again, the inverter is going to keep sweeping the curve, finding out which is the best maximum power point, designating that as a maximum power point, global maximum power point for the next interval before the sweep happens again. Okay, so that's a sort of what should I say, a 10,000-foot level view of it. We can go into much further detail, but that would be another presentation by itself.
Thank you, Harsha.
Thanks, John.
Another feature of the Gen24 is the PV point. So PV point, you don't need to make the Gen24 a hybrid inverter. The Gen24 out of the box installed has the ability to run a PV point, which is a receptacle when the sun is shining, but the grid has gone down. As you can see up here, on this slide, again, it's just another power connection should the grid go out. And as you see on the third point there, for single phase electrical loads up to 1.56 kilowatts, and not a lot other than that. It is pretty straightforward. Again, it doesn't need to be switched over to hybrid, and you don't need the batteries for the PV point to work. In practice, I'm not sure how often that would be the case, that the sun is shining and the grid goes down, but it is a feature that comes with the Gen24, so we certainly wanted to point it out. Oh boy. Flexibility for greater potential, as the slide says there. When I look at this and we talk to the design, and the slide says that it's ideally equipped for most Canadian roof situations. I think that's probably true, but I think it's also true, just to be brutally honest, that we would have preferred an additional MPP tracker on this inverter. That's certainly still a want of ours as we look at continuing to launch new products. One thing I will say about the inverter itself, though, I am thrilled that when we get to the larger power classes, the 7.7 and the 10 kilowatt of the Gen24, that the short circuit current for this inverter is where we need it to be. It's at 41.25. So as you look at modules ever increasing in power, you take a short circuit current on a PV module up to 16 will work in 2 strings at 41.25 for the 1 MPP tracker. So quick math, 16 times 2 times 1.25 would get us right around 40 amps. And we're at 41.25 on that one tracker. So quite happy with that feature of the Gen24, but certainly goes without saying, we would have liked to have been able to offer one additional MPP tracker. Looking at the picture on the left, I apologize for the conduit running through the wall there. We understand that's not a North American install, but more importantly, have a look to the right side of that picture of the inverter. And you're going to see the hinge point at the top and of the backer plate. And then as you go to the bottom of the backer plate where the inverter clicks in. Harsha touched on this, but it's much different than the primos. So the primo being a snap inverter, you could, wire that inverter in place and still hinge out the inverter, if you will, with the wiring staying in place. That is not the case with the Gen24. It will not hinge out once installed. The electrical would have to be completely disconnected for you to remove that inverter from the backer plate. Okay. Again, looking at the product itself, Harsha, did you want to run through this one as well, or expand on any of the specs that you see?
Well, thanks, John. One thing that you do want to keep in mind is the primos are capable of working both at 600 and 1000 volts DC, whereas the Gen24 will not go to 1000 volts. It only goes to 600 volts DC. That's one thing. Now, while we do speak about having a wide voltage range, it's not per se good design as such to ever choose to operate or string the PV array such that you're on the lower end of the voltage range. That's just bad practice. So anytime you make use of string design on any inverter, and more so on ours, you always want to choose to have the longest possible strings while not exceeding the maximum permissible voltage. It's simply because the higher you go on the voltage, the more efficient the solar array and the panels are, and also your losses on the cabling, because it is also DC and it's low voltage. So low voltage cabling will need for you to upsize your cabling to keep the losses to a minimum, which can all be done away with or not even thought about if you make sure that you always choose to go with strings, which are as long as possible. And if you do want to make use of the design, I do understand that it's common practice in the industry to go with third-party simulation tools, but we always ask that you run that design, which was spit out by your third-party simulation tool, through the Fronius calculator tool as well, which I placed a link here on the right side in the chat. It's called creator.fronius.com, simply because there are device limitations which third-party tools are agnostic towards. Okay, so you might think that the PV array, that design that you got off of some other third-party simulation tool is good. It might be good, but then again, there will be device limitations inherent to every manufacturer, not just the Fronius, which your third-party tool isn't going to take into account. So it's just as a sanity check, as we like to call it. You always want to run that design through the Fronius creator tool as well. That's one thing. And as always, I always keep harping on about this is roof space permitting, always choose to go with the biggest possible array vis-a-vis the size of the inverter. That is, maximize the DC to AC ratio.
Thank you, Harsha.
Thanks.
So again, I've touched on it already with the fan or the active cooling technology. It's pretty straightforward. This is, an inverter is power electronics. So the cooler you can keep them, the better that inverter is going to work. And it's certainly going to extend the life of the inverter by keeping it cooler. There's also an additional story in that picture that you're looking at beyond the active cooling technology, and that is the fin system that you see, the cooling fins there, somewhat blurred out just beside the fan. There's a sustainability story there. So I started with our 24 hours of sun campaign, and that's ongoing. And we want to become more self-sufficient with our energy management as we migrate away from fossil fuel usage. Well, look at the Gen24. It's just in keeping with our sustainability focus, and that those fins are made of aluminum, and in the case of the Gen24, it happens to be recycled aluminum. So there's a nice sustainability story there as well. So again, keep power electronics cool. What's the net result of that? Longer life, higher yield out of those out of the inverter, and very, very low maintenance costs, hopefully, not just because of the active cooling technology, certainly helps, but again, there's just not a lot on this inverter to maintain. And Harsha, I'm going to flip it back to you for the energy management portion, if I could.
Thanks, John. Sorry. Yeah, so now this is a little advanced in the sense that this is oftentimes not either understood or used even by most people, simply because energy management here refers to what you want to do with the energy vis-a-vis the pricing, in the sense, depending on how you have your connection or contract with the utility, you may be getting a good deal in terms of what happens when you send power back to hydro or the utility. Or if you may be getting a bad deal like in Europe, where utility companies are really not interested in buying energy back from an end user. They'd rather you store it and use it yourself, because they're more interested in either selling you the energy or helping you minimize the draw on their grid during peak times, which is a lot more expensive from the utilities perspective to maintain, which is why oftentimes they do use time of use pricing. So now let's assume that BC Hydro decides to go with time of use pricing, except they won't give you the benefit if you dump power back onto them at the same time, as in like during peak hours. So what this means is Hydro is really not interested in buying energy from you, because they'll give you the cheap rate during their peak hours while selling you the energy at peak rates if you were to consume during peak hours. Now that puts you in a quandary, because usually your peak rates are during working hours, which is daylight, which is the time when the inverter is making you the most power. So now if you don't have a sweet enough deal from Hydro to sell the energy back to them, then what exactly is it for you? So this is where the energy management comes into the picture. So even the existing data managers with the existing primos and the SIMOs are already capable of performing energy management, as long as you know how to interface this with whatever you appliance or loads you intend to get factored into the energy management system. This could be a hot water heater, it could be your air conditioning, it could be a pool pump, it could be an electric vehicle charging unit, any of those things. So we've got different programmable IOs on the data manager for the primos and the SIMOs, and on the pilot, as it's called for the Gen24, which you can use to interface with an energy management device or some other third-party device with which you can interface to whatever loads or appliances you are trying to run, instead of sending the energy back to Hydro. Or if you had a battery, you could even store it in the battery and use it later if you choose to. So it all depends on what you intend to do and how you intend to go about it. Now, some people have smart grid ready appliances. And so for those situations, you could basically tie it directly into the IO by using some sort of an interface circuit, because the IOs are only voltage signals. They don't have a lot of power to drive them. That's where your interface circuit comes into the picture. Now, in Europe, like the first slide that John was referring to, we've got a lot of other appliances, which auxiliary features and devices, which we are trying to get into the Canadian market as well. One of them, the most popular one, happens to be the Ohm Pilot. The Ohm Pilot is a hot water heater feature that ties into the inverter's IO management system, whereby you can game or program the system such that if you are if you're producing energy beyond a certain set threshold between these hours, then I would rather use this energy to heat my hot water heater through the Ohm Pilot rather than buy from Hydro, because you'll probably be paying through your nose if you were to consume energy at that time. At the same time, if you were to deliver power back to Hydro at that peak time, depending on how Hydro's frame the contract with you, they might not be really giving you that good a deal. So in those situations, instead of you investing on a battery, etc., I might as well just go ahead and turn on my washer dryer or your air conditioning or your heating, or use it to heat your hot water or to charge your EV. This is where the energy management option comes into the picture, and it is already an option even with the existing devices, and is going to be offered as an option with the Gen24s as well.
Thank you, Harsha.
Thanks, Shai.
So as we come to the end of the presentation, I just want to recap. I mean, everybody on this call has a lot in the way of options when it comes to an inverter. So why Fronius and why the Gen24? The Gen24, again, as the slide states there, can be upgraded to a hybrid inverter in the future whenever they wish, whenever your customer wishes. So again, it's at two different price points. So why spend the additional money today on a hybrid unit, especially if there's no intention of that consumer in ever getting battery storage? It does operate no different than our primals and simals today, down to minus 40 degrees C. So that's real important as we're all Canadian on this call, and certainly in pockets of Canada, that does come into play. This is repeating, but the Gen24 and Fronius technology has a very strong record of very, very good, exceptional reliability. So we're very confident at launch time that this is going to be a successful launch with very few hiccups as we introduce this new technology to Canada. As mentioned, it is geared to the residential market, being a single phase inverter. The Verto is our three-phase solution to the existing SIMOs, but not ready for launch in Canada yet. And I don't have a launch date for the Verto. So to repeat, I just want to make sure that we are absolutely clear. The primos and simos, as you know them today, will be made through 2025. That's going to be especially important with the simos because that will be our three-phase solution until replaced. So we're working very, very hard on all things Verto, but we've got some work to do before then. Gen24 today, Gen24 Plus in November, and hopefully the Verto early as possible in 2025. So it's an exciting time as we continue to launch new products. I also want to point out and stress the why Fronius part of this. And you know, for those that have been in the solar industry for some time in Canada, you've seen manufacturers come to the market and you've seen them go. We haven't. We've been here since the earliest days of solar in Canada. We're not going anywhere. And beyond that, I really lean into what we offer as Fronius here in Canada. And I really believe it sets us apart from most of the competition. And what I'm specifically referring to, we don't have to look any further than Harsha that's on the call here. So, you know, as I look at our competitive landscape across the country, by and large, all of our competition is a product and a price with technical support, but that technical support, where is it? Is it in Canada? What do they have to bring to the market besides a product at a price? Well, our technical support certainly sets us apart from those competitors. Harsha and Ricky that are on the technical team, they know the Canadian market, they know the Canadian code, they know the Canadian installer, and from a troubleshooting standpoint, they're a long way in front of our competition, in my ever so humble opinion. The other thing that Fronius has is we have local inventory, albeit here in Mississauga, backed up by our distributor inventory across the country. And we have our finance team here, our customer service team. And like I said, we've been here since solar basically started in Canada. So we're proud of all of that. And it's not just selling an inverter to charge and charge selling it out the door. No, we're backing up that sale with all of those points raised. So again, as I started, I want to thank you all for your time. I want to thank Charge for setting this up for us. I am genuinely excited about the Gen24 launch. As a sales guy, to repeat, it's always good to be able to have something new to talk about when you go to the market. And here we are. If there are any questions, I know that Tatum has recorded this presentation, but that's my contact details on the screen. Should you have any additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you for your time and support of Fronius. We really appreciate your business.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Harsha, for joining us. I don't see any Q&A here. It looks like, Harsha, you were answering some that came through, but I'll just open the floor to any last-minute questions that might come through. And in the meantime, we are looking forward to welcoming John and Harsha back this Thursday for a more technical webinar on the Gen24. So anyone wanting to dig a little deeper on the technical side of things, come back Thursday at the same time. We will see you then. I don't see any other questions that have come through here. So as John mentioned, feel free to shoot him an email if you have any other questions, or we'll see you Thursday and you can ask those questions then. So thank you again, John and Harsha, and looking forward to see you Thursday.
Thanks so
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.